Is Premier McGuinty's decision to prorogue the legislature an abuse of power or a defensive action to thwart opposition? Well, joining us now to address the legitimacy of the prorogation is Peter Russell, Professor Emeritus in Political Science at the University of Toronto. Hello, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Pia.
Okay, people have written a lot in the last week about proroguing. They use these words interchangeably, cancelling, suspending, proroguing. What exactly is prorogation?
Proroguing is ending, terminating a session, and after it's terminated, there has to be a new session with a speech from the throne.
So finito, the end.
Finito. Mm-hmm.
Period.
And what's controversial, it's usually done when most of the business of the session has been dealt with, and it's time for a break, like a summer break or a holiday break. And this use of it is wrong. It's been used to avoid political embarrassment.
We will get into that.
Yeah.
Tell me why, looking back, why is it part of our parliamentary system?
Well, it started, as best I can tell, with Henry VIII. And he found Parliament getting very pesky. He ran the country, and he wanted to send it away without having to have any new Parliament created there was a kind of election in the boroughs. And instead of having, and that's what prorogation does, it ends a session and without having a new election. And Henry VIII liked that. It was nice. Get away, Parliament, you're bothering me. And that's worth thinking about, because in a sense, prime ministers who act like Henry VIII are really taking on regal powers.
Is there a difference between prorogation at a federal level and a provincial one?
No, basically prorogation.
Same rules
we have
apply.
Parliamentary systems at both levels. Okay.
And how long can a parliamentary body, how long can it be prorogued for?
Well, in law, a year. Simply because there's a guarantee in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that at the federal and provincial level, legislatures that the people elect must at least meet once a year. Now, that's for anything, you know. It just but a year is the outside limit, and then you'd be violating the Charter of Rights.
All right. What happens to all this legislative business that's before a Parliament when prorogation happens?
It dies, and that's one of the reasons that a lot of us, maybe most of us, think it's wrong. Because when you're in the middle of some important legislative business, including at a committee where, in this case, there's a motion of censure sent to the Finance Committee, a motion of contempt, to use the right word, to be investigated against a minister, that all stops.
So it's not just bills that die, it's all business.
Yes.
And can it all be reintroduced?
Pardon me?
Can it all be reintroduced?
You can start all over again, sure.
Sure.
Yeah, but that's not a good way to run a democracy, to shut down the business when it's the heat and the kitchen's too hot, and hope that everything cools off and you can have another Parliament when everybody's in a cooler mood.
I think in this past legislative session in Ontario, there was 132 bills introduced. I think 109 have died with prorogation. That's a lot of business. That's
a lot of business. I didn't know that figure.
I might have my numbers off
just
a little bit, but it is around that.
And that's why it's absolutely abnormal and incorrect, wrong. It's wrong to have done that.
On Monday night, was the Premier shocked, I think, everybody, saying that he was going to resign. And then, well, before that, announced prorogation. He did explain part of his reasoning for doing that, and that was, to concentrate on the government's negotiations with school teachers and the implementation of a wage freeze. I want to read something to our audience that you wrote just yesterday, and here's what you wrote. To tell us, as Mr. McGuinty did on Monday, that he asked the Lieutenant Governor to prorogue the legislature to allow these discussions with our Labour partners and the opposition parties to occur in an atmosphere that is free of the heightened rancor of politics in the legislature is to show contempt for parliamentary democracy. Peter Russell, how does this show contempt if prorogation is a legitimate tool that a government has in its arsenal?
Because it's to say we want to be moving ahead with our program, our policy, in this case a cutting down of the rights of labor to full collective bargaining. We'd like to do that out of the sight and monitoring of Parliament, because in Parliament there might be debate and discussion. Well, hello, Mr. McGuinty, that's what we fought 2 world wars for, so that government would be accountable and responsible to government, to Parliament, not just once or twice a year, but every day. Every day it's in office. And it's contemptuous to say we can only get ahead with our program with Parliament closed down. That's to show contempt of the parliamentary process.
You're saying it's morally contemptuous, not legally contemptuous.
Oh, that's right.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, yes.
I just want to be clear.
Yes.
Okay, I want to play you a clip from a show we did earlier this week on Premier McGuinty's resignation. This is John Duffy, a Liberal advisor from Strategy Corp, and he's talking about the constitutionality about prorogation.
This prorogation is perfectly constitutionally legitimate. It is unconstitutional to prorogue after a government has fallen. That would put us into a crisis. It is pushing it really hard to prorogue when the confidence of the House has been called into question by votes. There is nothing anywhere in a British Westminster system that suggests it's wrong to prorogue at this point.
John Duffy making the case, saying that he didn't do anything wrong, that the Premier didn't do anything wrong. What do you think of what John Duffy said?
I think he's dead wrong. What John doesn't understand is our Constitution has 2 main components. There's the written Constitution enforced in law, which is mostly the Constitution Act, 1867, and its various amendments. Got that? There's no violation of most of that law, but there, at the beginning of that legal document is that Canada will have a system of government similar in principle to that of the United Kingdom. And that points to the other part of our Constitution, the principles of parliamentary democracy. They're not in the written Constitution. The Prime Minister is not even mentioned in the written Constitution. Principles of parliamentary democracy have been worked out informally in a part of our Constitution that's not legally enforceable. And a fundamental principle is the responsibility of government to the elected legislature. That's the principle that's violated here.
But I guess the point that he's making is that this isn't unconstitutional. What the Premier...
It's unconstitutional in violating a principle of our Constitution. Of course it's unconstitutional. It's not the kind of violation you can take to court, but he's absolutely wrong.
Okay.
I don't think he's studied, I don't think he's written about parliamentary democracy and responsible government, know how we got it in the 1840s, and it's a fundamental principle.
Okay, let me ask you this. Is it fair to say that prorogation is increasingly being seen as an illegitimate thing for a government to do?
Yes, I think so. When it's used abnormally, when it's used not simply to end a session that's pretty much done all its business, but is used to avoid political controversy in the elected legislature.
Well, in the past...
The public don't want that. You know, they don't want Parliament to be shut down when there's a lot of important business before the people's representatives. That's why we have elections, so the people's representatives can make government accountable to them.
I'd argue that, 5 years ago, most Canadians, aside from political scholars, probably didn't talk much about it, or maybe hadn't even heard of the word prorogation, and yet there it is now in our Canadian lexicon. Dalton McGuinty isn't the only politician to use prorogation recently. Prime Minister Stephen Harper did it twice, 2008, 2009, Decembers of both years. Seems to me that Christy Clark has either cancelled or prorogued the BC legislature as well. I'm not clear on exactly what she did, but how do you explain this trend of prorogation we've seen in the last handful of years?
It's a bit like an epidemic, because and what some people are taking out of the Harper double prorogation is, my goodness, he got reelected with a majority. But I think what a point there, and so they say, well, the public really don't care. Hold on. I'm convinced that his majority running against a pretty weakened opposition in our last federal election would have been considerably larger. He went up 2 points. He should have gone up 10 points, what he had going for him. There were so many people who were turned off and wouldn't support him because of prorogation. So it's, but some people think, well, the people are okay with it. I see people, journalists saying, well, the public don't really mind. Well, they do mind. Remember, 60% of Canadians voted against Mr. Harper.
I mean,
over 60%.
But we haven't been able to draw a direct line from prorogation to how people voted.
No, that's very difficult ever to draw direct lines to. It's this issue that made all the people vote that way. Politics doesn't work that way.
Okay.
But I want to add one other thing. There are very tight conditions attached to the Governor General's accepting Harper advice to prorogue. Remember, it's the Crown's representatives that prorogues. And the conditions had tight time limits. There's no time limit on this one.
Okay.
John A. MacDonald, who was the one way back, the only other one to ask for a prorogation to avoid the heat in Parliament, again had a tight timeline.
By doing this, by Prime Minister Harper doing this, by Dalton McGuinty now doing this, to what extent are these leaders undermining the democratic process at large? I
think it's lethal what they're doing. And when you add that to the omnibus legislation at the federal level, the omnibus bill, which virtually makes a mockery of parliamentary scrutiny of government legislation. I mean, Parliament's supposed to examine each bill that's changing navigation rules or other parts of the public agenda. Each one is to get a committee of Parliament to look at it and bring in experts. They're saying we don't have to do that anymore. We're putting everything in an omnibus bill. We don't really want Parliament to spend much time on it. We're happy with it as a government. They can have a very limited look at it, and let's get going. That's an extremely contemptuous attitude to Parliament, and I think they're related.
Okay, you make the case that people do care about prorogation. I want to read you a couple comments that we got from our audience during our web chat from Tuesday night's program that probably back up your point. Here, let's listen to a couple of these.
Okay.
Why are all the Liberal guests smiling? Is this a happy moment to have no government in Ontario now? Who is paying for all these MPPs to go on holiday for 6 months or a year? How much will this cost the average taxpayer? That's from Mary Mills. Let me read you a couple more. We need answers on many of these issues, accountability and transparency, right? And one last one. Stop lauding McGuinty and his so-called accomplishments and his legacy, which is hurtful to many people, including me. The complete avoidance of accountability and his arrogance in using the law to avoid it by proroguing the government disgusts me. I'm guessing that you're not surprised by that kind of reaction.
I'm so pleased to hear that the people do care. Our great worry, and I really think it's my concern, and it's this. Mr. Harper, Mr. McGuinty, they're not sort of evil dictators with horns and axes coming at us to chop down and eliminate our democracy. They're just doing it in a kind of banal, bland way. And the great worry is that people just say, ho-hum, I guess it's okay. We won't have any legislative assembly meeting anymore for a while. And we could lose our democracy by actually being put to sleep by bland, undemocratic premiers. I put it that way. I mean, that's a great worry because they don't look like evil guys and they think they're Democrats, but they're not. They're not parliamentary Democrats.
You made the case about people caring and you saying that it had some result in the federal election. Be a bit of a futurist here for me. Do you think that the Liberals, when the legislature in Ontario resumes, can they live this out? Will they do well in the next election, or do you think this is going to stick?
I think it might well stick if indeed they don't listen to the public and at least go back and ask the Lieutenant Governor to give him a deadline that's a reasonable one, I think, within this calendar year. I think if they just close down the Legislative Assembly, for whatever time it takes the Liberal Party of Ontario to get a new leader, they are really saying our party is more important than parliamentary democracy in Ontario. Screw the Legislative Assembly. We've got to do our party first.
We will leave it there. Thank you, sir, for coming in and talking with us today.
All right.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.